Good evening, you're listening to The Truth Tank and I'm your host, The Tank. If this is your first time listening to The Truth Tank, a big welcome. If you are a repeat listener, welcome back. If I haven't made it clear already, The Truth Tank shop has officially moved from Etsy over to Spring. The link is in the show notes and my social media bio. You can pick yourself up some merch and support the show. If merch isn't your thing, I also have a buy me a coffee page. You can buy me some tank fuel. You can make a one-off donation or a recurring monthly payment of your choosing. It's up to you how much you think the show is worth. There are two options to support the show if you feel like doing so. So on tonight's episode, we're going to be having a break from the dark, depressing and dismal world of geopolitics, current events and global conflict. Instead, we're going to be having a look at a movie. This episode is going to be a film review. I haven't done one in a while. The last one I did was back in March, and that was for Project Hail Mary. It's been a really long time since I've been to the movies. March was the last time I went. It's now the 10th of June, the time of recording. I went to the movies yesterday on the 9th. That was the first time in months. That's, I think, the longest break I've had in between going to the movies. I think 3 months or just under 3 months was the record. So it was March. Yeah, about 2.5 something months. 2.5, 3 months, something like that. So the film in question is one of my most anticipated films of the year, and that is The Mandalorian and Grogu. Bit of a clunky title, if I'm honest. I think they probably could have come up with a much better name because I think everybody knows it's The Mandalorian and Grogu. The Adventures of the Mandalorian with the friendly participation of Grogu. Might have been a better, more Tarantino-esque title. Or just The Mandalorian. Star Wars, The Mandalorian, The Adventures of the Mandalorian. That probably would have had a nicer ring to it. The Mandalorian and Grogu sounds a bit clunky. Doesn't have a nice ring to it. So that is the film in question. As you know, I'm a big Star Wars fan. Of course, I'm going to cover a Star Wars film. It's the first Star Wars film in, I think, 7 years. The last Star Wars film came out in 2019, and that was the abysmally mediocre and terrible The Rise of Skywalker, which made absolutely no fucking sense. And that was the last time we've had Star Wars on the big screen. Star Wars now has become a TV commodity. There's been multiple shows, as you're probably well aware, The Mandalorian, Andor, Ahsoka, Maul, The Bad Batch, Obi-Wan, The Book of Boba Fett, final season of The Clone Wars, Tales of the Jedi, Tales of the Force, I think it's called. And there's probably more that I'm forgetting. Each of those TV shows are better than basically any of the crap that's come out in the cinema, minus Rogue One. Rogue One was the best of the Disney theatrical releases, in my opinion. The sequel trilogy sucked. You should know my opinion on that. I've covered it enough and I've talked about that enough over the years, or my dislike for Disney Star Wars. Some of the TV shows are hit and miss, not all perfect. Book of Boba Fett copped a lot of shit, but I thought it was entertaining. It wasn't half as bad as I had heard. Obi-Wan, same. Obi-Wan was more unnecessary. I think it was more of a, how would you say it? It was more of a, like a what-if scenario. What if Obi-Wan had have left Tatooine and gone on some adventures in between episodes 3 and 4? Because I always thought that, and I thought the whole point of Obi-Wan being vigilant and a protector was he just stayed on Tatooine watching over Luke for like 40 years. And that was kind of that disciplined samurai warrior in him, that he was going to be like the sentinel out in the desert watching the chosen one, Luke. So to have him leave the planet, then meet a young Princess Leia, while on the one hand it doesn't make any fucking sense, it was kind of stupid because it does kind of dilute the canon a bit. It was kind of cool from a what if kind of an adventure perspective, because Obi-Wan has some good moments in it. It's got some confusing ones, but it was ultimately pretty good, I thought. The battle with him and Darth Vader, once again, very cool to see that. I just think it's a little unnecessary because, once again, I think the whole emotional impact of A New Hope is when he chooses to sacrifice himself to save Luke, the kid that he had been watching in the desert for the past 40 years. He sacrifices himself to save Luke and confront Vader at the same time. And I thought the whole point with that fight was they hadn't seen each other since Mustafar. What does Vader say when the Falcon is in the Death Star? I sense a presence I haven't felt in a very long time. And then when they finally meet each other, when I left you, I was the apprentice, now I am the master. It makes it so much more powerful. But when you have Obi-Wan mixed in with that and you realize that, well, he fought Vader like 10 years before that, it's not as impactful because he's already beaten Vader twice. So it makes the impact of that fight a lot more diminished, in my opinion, because that's the thing Disney has never really understood. You have to have the bad guy be invincible until the final film. What they did in Force Awakens, as I've mentioned many times before, having Rey beat Kylo Ren in, 2.5 minutes, the first time she's picked up a lightsaber and she beats this fucking rage monster who's the grandson of Darth Vader, completely destabilizes not only the character of Kylo Ren, but really the emotional crux of future films, because there is no anticipation or payoff in the final film. She doesn't have to fight the ultimate villain as Luke did. She's more overpowered and just knows how to do everything better than anybody else, and she can just best her foes the first time she beats them. So why is this character compelling? She doesn't go on the traditional hero journey. She doesn't go on a hero journey at all. She just manages to vanquish foe after foe and become this inevitable symbol of modern Disney Star Wars heroism, with a large amount of feminist ideology laid upon it. If she got her ass kicked by Kylo Ren, then it's more compelling going into The Last Jedi. And I think they do have a bit of a duel halfway through the film. And then there's the whole thing with Snoke and Snoke getting killed, which once again makes no sense, because why would you kill the Emperor in Empire Strikes Back when you don't even really know anything about him? So having Obi-Wan beat Vader in the Obi-Wan series, he fights him twice. Once he gets beaten by Vader, then he ultimately defeats him, I think does destabilize the emotion of A New Hope. But at the same time, it only destabilizes it if you actually class it as canon and you class it as an actual legitimate part of the overarching Star Wars canon, and if you take it seriously. And as I mentioned, that's how I look at Obi-Wan. It was good on the surface. It does expand a few things here and there. It's got the Inquisitors. It's got some cool stormtroopers with black and red armor. There's that big temple, Sith temple thing in the ocean. There's snow speeders, or the air speeders that have been modified into snow speeders. There's that weird collection of Jedi in the bottom of the temple, in that corridor, in that weird room. Those elements were cool. I did enjoy them. But at the same time, I kind of took it with a grain of salt, because I think it does destabilize things a little bit. And the whole relationship with Obi-Wan and a young Princess Leia, once again, does work in the context of the show. I just don't think it really has any payoff into the films. And I can see why that show was a bit more divisive. Because on the one hand, you could argue they're deliberately just trying to destabilize A New Hope, or they're trying to rewrite certain things about A New Hope. But at the same time, I think it was more having fun, playing around with these ideas. As I just mentioned, I take it more as a what-if adventure, a what-if scenario. I'm watching Andor at the moment, so I can't really critique that too much. I've only seen the first couple of episodes. Very dark, very gritty. Doesn't really feel like a Star Wars show. It obviously has that kind of that spy espionage feel to it. But at the same time, it also does feel like a Star Wars show at the same time. I haven't seen any stormtroopers yet, so it doesn't quite feel like a Star Wars show. Because we all know it doesn't feel like a Star Wars show or movie until you have a stormtrooper or a clone trooper, in most cases. And that was a joke. I just finished the Maul TV show. I really like that. I liked the direction they've gone with that. It's a bit of a follow-over from the Bad Batch. I like the continuity of the animated shows. The animated shows are great. I think that is by far, hands down, the best Star Wars content since the prequels. The attention to detail, the storytelling, and the care for the characters and the character development over the seasons has been really great. Dave Filoni, you can tell, really does care about these characters and the story arcs and adding to the Star Wars mythology. Well, Rebels is the same. I forgot Rebels. I just finished all of Rebels a couple of months ago. Once again, fantastic. Some of the best Star Wars stories. If they made each of those seasons of Rebels into a movie, you'd have a guaranteed $2 billion revenue per film. They are fucking excellent. I like the time period it takes place into. It's, I think, just before A New Hope. So just before the rebellion gets its act together. Or it's around that time period where the rebellion's growing. The Bad Batch 2 was excellent. Just the character arc and the journey. That would also make a great film as well. You can have Star Wars without needing the Jedi perspective in it. Or connecting it to the Skywalker saga. And it still works. Because that's always the argument from Kathleen Kennedy is it doesn't connect, or we need another Skywalker saga. It's like, no, you can make Star Wars without the Skywalkers. It's been proven that it works. The Bad Batch would have been a great theatrical film because there's only 3 seasons of it. You could easily make that into 3 big budget standalone trilogy. The characterization's great. And once again, it's in that really interesting transition period of Star Wars where it goes from Republic to Empire. The clones are being phased out in favor of stormtroopers. There's an Imperial Admiral Rampart that doesn't like clones. He wants to phase them out, but then they replace them with the first generation of stormtroopers, the TK1 trooper, and then the clones get used for experiments. So there's a lot of real world World War II scenarios kind of chucked in there as well. Experimentation on prisoners and doing all these weird scientific experiments for the Emperor's Necromancer project, and how the Empire just turns a blind eye to experimenting on children and clones in the name of science and progress to benefit the Empire. There's a very grey moral zone that they touch upon quite a lot in that show. The action's good too, and the TK1 stormtroopers look cool. But it is that cool transition point because you have all the old gunships and stuff from the Republic that the Empire is still using. These cool like Generation 1 shuttles, the old clone V-bomber. Some of the stormtroopers have the old clone rifles. Over the course of the series, you see the eventual phasing out of the clones, getting rid of the colours and the personalizations to the armour and to the troopers in favour of this cold, neutral uniformity, which I thought was really cool because the clones were much cooler than the stormtroopers. They all had personalities. They all had coloured bits on the armour, and their armour was all scratched and battle damaged. They were keeping tally of their kills and stuff like that. Stormtroopers are cool, don't get me wrong, but they're always a bit cold and unpersonal, which is obviously the whole point. But the Bad Batch explains why that uniformity was needed, because the clones start to question their orders and question what they did in the war. Why do they follow Order 66? And should they really be following blind orders from their command? And they get replaced with the TK1 trooper, which is a mix of recruits from across the Empire and clones. They also bring back the Clone Commando, which was really cool. I think I could talk about the Star Wars shows for another hour. But before I waffle on any longer, let's just get into tonight's episode. So without further ado, this is episode 103 of The Truth Tank, The Mandalorian and Grogu review, Season 4 and the future of the Little Green Cash Machine. Before I get too far into the review, this episode does contain spoilers, so if you haven't seen the film or are planning on it, please stop listening now. You have been warned. It's been a few months since I went to the movies, with everything happening in the world. At the moment, the chaos, the dystopian future we're all facing. Going to the movies on a Tuesday afternoon was a break and a bit of a stress reliever. It was nice going to the movies again, just sitting in a dark room with about 10 other people and watching a franchise that I have loved since I was a kid. So the film starts off without a credit crawl, which I wasn't really anticipating there was going to be one. Rogue One didn't have one. It kind of just starts and gets into it, and this is more or less the same thing. I think the credit crawl should be reserved for the episodic Star Wars films and not so much the spin-offs, because The Mandalorian does its own thing, so why not the film? However, we do get some text that explains the backdrop of The Mandalorian and where the Mandalorian and Grogu find themselves. Because after all, it's been a number of years since Season 3 came out. Season 3 came out in 2023, and it wasn't really the best season either. I thought it was average personally. Season 1 and 2 were excellent. Season 2 really does open the door for more Mandalorian adventures and expands the mythology of the Mandalorian and Star Wars, and sets up Season 3 to carry on the adventures of Din Djarin and Grogu, but ultimately that's not what happened. That storyline was more put on the back burner in favor of expanding the Mandalorian and the Bo-Katan story, which they could have done both. There was just so much wasted opportunity in Season 3. That stupid episode with that Imperial spy on Coruscant, the scientist episode, that was cool because you get to see Coruscant. It was, like a futuristic modern city. That was cool, that element of it. But the Mandalorian wasn't even in that episode. And it was alright on one hand. It was kind of just tedious as well because we want the Mandalorian. And it was just another sidetracking subplot that didn't really need to be brought into Season 3. And maybe it did, I can't really remember. It's been a while since I've seen it. The other retarded episode was the one with Jack Black and Lizzo, where the Mandalorian goes to that rich elitist planet run by Jack Black and Lizzo, where the galaxy's biggest wankers come to shop. That episode was completely fucking retarded. A bunch of rich elite wankers who have reprogrammed battle droids to carry their shopping. It was completely and utterly ridiculous. They didn't really help build onto the story or the subplots, except for really the end of it where Bo-Katan and the Axe Wolves, I don't know, make some pact or something like that. Can't remember. But that episode, I remember watching it, what with this battle droid carrying boxes of shoes and Star Wars versions of Dolce & Gabbana bags and Star Wars Gucci stuff. I thought to myself, what the fuck were the writers smoking? That was a complete waste of an episode. And there's just other parts of Season 3 too, like the Mandalorian wasn't really the focus. He has these episodes obviously, but he was really put on the back burner in favor of the Bo-Katan Mandalorian leader story, and it got distracted by a bunch of stupid subplots like that. It could have been really special, but I don't know why they went that direction. And then there was no word about a Season 4, and then a couple of years ago they said they were going to make this Mandalorian film, which I was pretty excited about. I thought, why not? The Mandalorian could work as a standalone film. It definitely has that cinematic appeal to it. The Mandalorian is directed by series creator Jon Favreau. It's written by Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni, and Noah Claw. The film also stars Pedro Pascal as the Mandalorian, or should I say the face and voice of the Mandalorian, because we all know he isn't really the action stunt Mandalorian. So there's technically 3 people that play the Mandalorian in the film. The second being Brendan Wayne. He's the main stunt performer in the Mandalorian TV show and the film. And Lateef Crowder, who does the fights and the martial arts side of the Mandalorian. It also stars Sigourney Weaver as Colonel Ward, and who doesn't love Sigourney Weaver? She's one of my favourite all-time actresses. Jeremy Allen White as voice of Rotta the Hutt. Steve Bloom as Zeb Orellis. If you've watched Rebels, you'll know who Zeb is. He's one of my favourite characters from that show. Martin Scorsese even makes an appearance as Hugo Durant and Johnny Coyne. So the film opens on a unidentified snow planet. And I've always loved the snow planets in Star Wars. Hoth is one of my favourite planets, even though there's not really anything there. Who doesn't love the start of Empire Strikes Back? It's fucking great. There's that Starkiller base in Force Awakens. It was kind of alright. There's more nostalgia than anything really. So the film opens on this snow planet with an Imperial officer, or should I say a remnant Imperial officer, making a very one-sided deal with other local Outer Rim leaders. Now, just like the TV show, the film is set in the Outer Rim. The rebels don't have jurisdiction and are too small to police every part of the galaxy. So on the Outer Rim, the remnants of the Imperials are still basically the main force that runs everything. Imperial officers have turned into either like crime bosses or are running their own Imperial pockets scattered around the Outer Rim, which I did like because the Empire is obviously massive. It does make sense that they wouldn't all have been taken out in Return of the Jedi, and also opens a door to have the Imperials be the main antagonists again, much like Thorn in Ahsoka and the Timothy Zahn novels, Heir to the Empire, and I can't remember the other one. This Imperial officer is trying to extort these leaders for pretty much protection money. He's an absolute prick. The Imperial officer is explaining how things used to be better under the Empire. His argument is the rebels don't have the resources or manpower to police the entire galaxy. Things worked better under the Empire and there was more security. And he wants a return to the glory days of the Empire. This was very reminiscent of Soviet nostalgism. After the fall of the Soviet Union, a lot of people who had grown up and worked and lived in the Soviet Union wanted it back because they had a job, they had a purpose, they had security, even though they gave up freedom and it, more or less was an oppressive totalitarian regime. Things still functioned better than the chaotic transition period after the fall of an empire like that. And this is a similar thing that plays out in The Mandalorian. In the wake of the Empire, pirates and crime organizations have risen up to take control of criminal enterprises in the wake of the Empire. I guess there is an argument to that. Things might have appeared to function under the Soviet Union, but what are you giving up in return? You're giving up personal autonomy and freedom in a society where you can be chucked in jail at any time for talking out about the supreme leader. But in Western democratic societies, we can go completely the opposite way too. If you have too much personal liberty and freedom and autonomy, on a personal level, you can descend into chaos as well, because you can spend 30, 40 years trying to figure out what you want to do in life if you don't have a direction to go in. Oh, I don't know if I want to do this. I don't know if I want to do that. In a country like China, you get assigned an area of study, or if you have an aptitude for something, you get kind of pushed in that direction. At least you have a direction to go in. How many people are in the Western world just work dead-end jobs, or they can only get a dead-end job because there's no jobs in the field that they studied? Yeah, they were free to go to uni and, pursue an artistic course, but in reality, there is no work for artistic jobs, or very little. And then you end up making coffees for 20 years, hating your life and blaming everybody else. The inversion of logic and reality is also brought into the question. Most logical people could very easily describe what a woman is, but the Australian government is having a very difficult time trying to do that because they've gone so far off the reservation in terms of logic and basically just what everyone knows to be sensible, because they've brought too far heavily into this woke shit. Now, that doesn't happen in a society like the Soviet Union, where information is controlled by the government. Yeah, I guess the opposite is true too, because the information is trying to be controlled by the government here, but there's alternative voices countering the official narrative, where a woke ideology wouldn't work itself into a Soviet-style society because it would largely go against what the government is trying to push. You can't just have the population believe in whatever they want to believe and going in different directions and dyeing their hair blue and supporting this cause, because that goes against the Soviet cause, which is the workers' paradise or something like that. Anyway, that was a very off-topic way of describing a scene from The Mandalorian. So there is a bit of this nostalgia about the good old days of the Empire, and this Imperial officer wants to revive the Empire that he remembers. The opening scene is very cool. There's this very dimly lit room. There's a big window where he's sitting, and the window is looking out over this ice world. It's snowing pretty heavily and windy. And probably the most exciting thing for me right off the bat was in the background of this room were a bunch of snowtroopers. And this is the first time we've seen snowtroopers since Empire Strikes Back. Snowtroopers are my favorite stormtrooper. I've always wanted to go to a Comic-Con as a snowtrooper or a scout trooper, mainly because they're the easiest ones to sit down in. But I think I'm probably a bit big to pull off a stormtrooper. But mainly a snowtrooper. I've never seen... Actually, I'll take that back. I've only seen one person cosplay as a snowtrooper, and it looked fucking awesome. Because if you go as a stormtrooper, you can't sit down, and you get pretty badly chafed because of the leg armor. Snow and scout troopers don't have the armor up the leg, so you don't get chafed and you can sit down. Fun fact. But that's really cool. You see all these remnant snow troops who are aligning themselves with this Imperial officer. The other cool thing was you see them without the the snow shield over the face. So they've got this like black respirator looking mask attached to the bottom of the helmet. It looks kind of creepy the first time you see it. It's like this black respiratory thing hanging off of the mask. Looks kind of weird. At the same time, it is cool because it's a way for the Mandalorian to have its own snowtrooper. So right from the get-go, we had dropped straight into the action, and it was very much like the TV show. You just drop straight into the action straight away, because it's not too long after that the Mandalorian comes knocking. He takes out a number of the snow troops, and he's making his way up to where this Imperial officer finds himself. Security is on high alert. The snow troopers are trying to stop the Mandalorian from shooting his way through their ranks. The Imperial officer leaves his guests and decides to fuck off and make an escape. There's a white all-terrain mouse droid that makes its way through the bowels of this facility. It's got little flashing lights, and it comes up against Grogu, and this is the first time we see Grogu on the big screen, which is really, really cool. He uses the Force to basically pull it apart from the inside. The Imperial officer makes a break for it, and Grogu confronts a AT-AT driver, which is one of the first nostalgic nods to the prequels. And there's a few nostalgic nods during this film. The AT-ATs were a really cool vehicle. They used them a lot in the Clone Wars. It was cool seeing that back on the big screen. The Mandalorian commandeers the AT-AT, and him and Grogu make a very daring descent down the mountain to try to capture the Imperial officer. They run down the side of this mountain to the narrow pathway below, where they are fired upon by 3 AT-ATs. This is a very cool scene too, very nostalgic of Empire. The Mando charges head first into oncoming fire. He goes in between their legs, he jumps onto one of the big feet, blows it up with a grenade, which is really cool, collapsing it. It was really cool seeing the AT-ATs back in the snow. He makes his way onto one of them. He blows one up from the inside out, makes his way to the head one where the Imperial officer is. And you get a good look at the cockpit too. There's only some brief scenes of the cockpit in Empire Strikes Back. I did really get a kick out of that, seeing the AT-AT drivers back and the commander in the cockpit. Now this Imperial officer is an absolute twat too, so you don't really feel sorry for anything that happens to him. One of the coolest scenes in the opening sequence is when the Mandalorian makes his way onto the AT-AT. He heads through the cargo bay. The alert's being given out by the Imperial officer for all the troops to load up and take out the Mandalorian. There's a really cool scene of the snow troops gearing up in the hangar. They're like loading their weapons, which is really cool because you don't really see that in Star Wars a lot. They're loading their guns, they're putting magazines in. One of the snow troops slides the face shield up over the black part of the helmet, which is cool. And then the Mandalorian enters the hangar and pretty much wipes everybody out before making his way to the cockpit. You see a lot of the interior of the AT-AT, which I thought was really cool. This scene could have gone on for half an hour. I loved it. The Imperial officer makes a getaway. He has an escape vehicle in the hangar. He set a trap for the Mandalorian, but the Mandalorian won't be outsmarted. He takes him out using the AT-AT's guns before flying out of the cockpit just as the AT-AT blows up, which I thought was a very cool way to drop people back into the world of the Mandalorian. It was action-packed. So the Mandalorian makes his way back to the Rebel base, that planet from Season 3, the tropical-looking one. And this is where we get opening credits. I think this is the first Star Wars film to have opening credits. The opening credits, too, are very heavily influenced by Apocalypse Now. It has that classic setting sun with the X-Wings in the foreground, which has been used in most of the new Star Wars films, I think. It was used in, The Force Awakens, I think The Last Jedi, and one of the other ones, I can't remember. It's called the Apocalypse Now shot, if you're not familiar, look it up. And that scene transitions into this opening credit montage, which is very heavily Top Gun inspired. The sunset aircraft carrier opening of all the guys doing their various things on the aircraft carrier, guiding an aircraft. It's very heavily Top Gun influenced, which is pretty cool because it works exactly the same way in Star Wars as it does with Top Gun. But from there, we are now dropped into the central plot of the film. And this is our first introduction to Sigourney Weaver's character, Colonel Ward. She is the basically leader of this rebel detachment. I think she's a former pilot. The Mando walks into the rebel bar pretty much, which is basically a Star Wars version of a World War II fighter squadron bar. There's all those circular military buildings scattered about the place. And there's a blink if you miss it cameo of Dave Filoni sitting at the bar with his cowboy hat on, which I thought was really cool. The Mandalorian has been working for Colonel Ward. He's been going through the deck of cards, so to say, accepting bounties and taking out remnant Imperial officers who are trying to basically restart the Empire. This is where the War on Terror makes a little stamp on the film, because they've got a deck of cards, Star Wars cards, with similar values that high-ranking targets were assigned values on deck of cards that were used by the US Army to take out bad guys, which works, but at the same time it does make you wonder, are the rebels actually the good guys in this? Or is the Empire? Maybe the Empire, and like that Imperial officer at the start of the film said, the Empire brought order. Maybe the rebels aren't the good guys after all. Makes you wonder. So the Mandalorian's been making his way through this deck of cards. He tells the Colonel that this job got messy. The Colonel debriefs Mandalorian. There's a cool scene at the table where Grogu's trying to use the Force to get a snack bowl over to him before the Colonel pulls it back. And fun fact, Sigourney Weaver agreed to do the movie after reading the script, but she did have a clause about doing the film. She wanted to interact with Grogu as much as possible, which, yeah, that would have been a requirement if I had done the film as well. Who wouldn't want as many scenes as possible with Grogu? Mando explains that things got messy. The Colonel replies, they usually do. But she has another job lined up for him, another high-valued target from the deck of cards. A former Imperial commander known as Janu Coin, or Commander Coin or something like that. Unlike the first job, this one is a rescue mission. The Mandalorian has to rescue Rotta the Hutt, Jabba the Hutt's son. He's being held by this Janu Coin, but the job is on behalf of the twin Hutts. Mando is a bit dubious about the morality of accepting a job on behalf of gangsters. Colonel Ward explains that they have the information on the identity of this mystery Imperial. They'll hand over the information once their nephew has been safely returned. So Din Djarin agrees to do the job. As payment for the previous job and a down payment for the rescue mission, the Colonel gifts Mandalorian a brand new Razor Crest that they have commandeered from an Imperial officer's collection. It's completely stock and it's got yellow racing stripes on it. I love how they do that in Star Wars too. It's very hot rod culture, which is, anyone who knows George Lucas knows he was a street racer and into hot rods in a very big way. Obviously his first film, American Graffiti, masterpiece too. It was all about the hot rod subculture in Modesto, California. Accompanying him on this rescue mission is Zeb from Rebels. He's basically the pilot, while Mando is on the ground rescuing or killing, whatever the mission happens to be. And once again, just like the intro, we're dropped right back into the action. The second bounty involves going to Nal Hutta and meeting the twins, which I did really like. I love that connection back to the Clone Wars and Rebels, because if you've seen those shows, pretty much every episode was like a new mission or a continuation of a previous mission. I like that format. And the Mandalorian and Grogu does a very similar thing. It's basically mission after mission. The only downside of that is I got a sense early on that was going to be the main plot of the film. There wasn't going to be too many subplots. And I got the sense that it wasn't really trying to build to a larger overarching story that would set up sequels or anything. It was more or less just going to be a standalone kind of action adventure, which I'll elaborate on a bit later in the show. So Nal Hutta was a very interesting planet. It's basically a swampy jungle. The Hutt's palace is built into a mountain, very reminiscent of Jabba's palace. Now the Mando lands on Nal Hutta and makes his way to introduce himself to the twins. The palace is surrounded by these reclaimed battle and super battle droids, which was pretty cool. Another nostalgic connection to the prequels. They have this mercenary security droid army. I did like that too, because usually the droids in Star Wars are all very uniform and they all look the same pretty much. Having the droids be made out of pretty much spare parts of other droids was a very interesting direction to go in. It made them more personalized because they all look different. They all look like mercenaries. Some have got like super battle droid bodies with different arms. Some have got like a battle droid looking head, I think I'm pretty sure I even saw a couple of assassin droids in there as well. There's even that droid from Rogue One, the big one, the Imperial security droid. But I reckon one of the droids flying the ships has like a red assassin droid head, which is in most of the animated shows. So the Mandalorian makes his way to the twins, where they explain the nature of the mission. Mando is to rescue their nephew Rotta the Hutt on a planet called Shikari, where he's being held against his will. And this is the first time in any of the Star Wars films we've seen so many Hutts in the one place. There's a cool scene where Din Djarin's walking through the very creepy palace. The passageways are basically just gigantic slug tunnels that have been carved out of the earth. There's all these different rooms with different Hutts in it. A few of them are sleeping. One of them's grilling something over a fire. Then they come into this big chamber where there is the twins. The twins are the same two twins from the Book of Boba Fett. I thought the twins were the same, is it brother and sister Hutts from the Clone Wars, but apparently they're not. What were their names? Zero or Zyro or something like that? Can't remember. The only problem with the twins' design is they are so fucking dark. They just look like these big fat masses that are basically in the back of the screen. They could have made them a bit more lighter in color or a bit more distinctive, because every scene you see them in is so dark you don't really get a good sense of what they look like. A lot of the shots are wider shots and they just look like these kind of dark green black blobs. A few of the close-up scenes, they've got like jewelry on their head or tattoos. Rotta's the same. He's got like I think a tattoo on the back of his head. But I did really enjoy seeing more Hutts on the screen. And Jabba's basically been the only Hutt for so long. There's been obviously more in the Clone Wars. These are the first Hutts we've seen on screen since Jabba. I did also really like the design of the palace, having that iconic Jabba the Hutt palace, but on an epic scale, because the palace has been more or less built into like a mountain, a big slug hut thing, mound, whatever you want to call it. It's also very reminiscent of Jabba's palace. They've had the big throne room, the frog tank, and there's a kind of like a grated grill thing on the floor, which you obviously know is going to be some type of a trapdoor. So the Mandalorian agrees to rescue Rotta the Hutt and heads to Shikari, which is one of my favourite planets in the film. It's a very cool 1920s New York gangster planet, pretty much, complete with an above-ground train system. There's some really cool land speeder looking cars in it. Very Art Deco 1920s inspired. Zeb drops Mando and Grogu onto the planet, where he makes his way through the city looking for information about Rotta the Hutt. And this is where he comes across Martin Scorsese's character, the four-legged space monkey who's working in a Euros cart. And Martin Scorsese too was a very odd choice to be in this film. I know in the first season of The Mandalorian, Werner Herzog, who's also a director, was the client. So maybe they're trying to keep up that trend of having big directors make cameos, even though Scorsese was a completely CGI character. Which is weird, because he doesn't seem like the kind of guy that would like Star Wars or sci-fi or really films with huge amounts of special effects in them. He's always been obviously more of a traditionalist. So that was very interesting that Scorsese was in it. And the scenes involving the Mandalorian and Hugo Durant were pretty funny. He's trying to bribe him to give him information about Rotta the Hutt. He's too scared to talk about criminal elements because he thinks he's going to get caught up in them. That scene's pretty funny. He offers him a lot of money. Keep your money. I don't want any trouble. Because I'm looking for information about Rotta the Hutt. He goes, oh, that hut. And points him to a billboard where he finds out that Rotta the Hutt is actually a gladiatorial fighter on this planet. And Rotta the Hutt, unlike his father Jabba, keeps himself in shape. He's pretty much a muscle-bound, steroid-munching Hutt, which was a nice twist, because you always think of them as being these fat, lazy slugs, and Rotta is this basically jacked, roid-munching Hutt. From there, Mando tracks down Rotta. He's been held in a cell where he's been massaged by these massage droids, which I got a bit of a kick out of. I thought that was very funny. He explains that he's not being held against his will, that Jano Coin owns his contract, and he has one more fight until he has his freedom. He willingly became a gladiatorial fighter, because when he first started fighting, he was booed because he was the son of Jabba the Hutt. People wanted him dead, but then when he started to win, he became a champion, and then they started cheering his name. And Rotta 2 was not what I thought. He was the complete opposite. I liked the voice of Jeremy Allen Wade. Rotta's got a nice way of talking. The voice definitely suits. But this leaves the Mandalorian in a bit of a conundrum. How's he supposed to rescue Rotta if he doesn't want to leave? So he goes to meet Jano in his club Salt, which is basically like a 1920s bar and diner, which is really cool. I did really like this planet. I hope it makes an appearance in other Star Wars TV shows and films. Mando approaches someone in the bar and says he wants to see Jano. This guy pretends to be him. A big fight ensues. Grogu's hiding on the roof with all these caged birds, which is really cool too, because all the birds are like puppets in cages. And there was a huge focus on practical effects in this film too, which I really did appreciate. It was really cool seeing that they've actually gone to the effort to make the cages and the birds, and then to make them pretty much all move and make them animatronic, more or less. So after Mando has kicked the shit out of everybody in the bar, Jano Coin introduces himself and takes Mando into a back room where he makes him a proposal. He explains that Rotta has one more fight, and it's going to be his last, because it's going to be a fight to the death. He's going to have all these dangerous creatures come out and attack him, and they can make him a lot of money on Rotta being killed in his last match. Jano Coin is the salt baron of Shikari. He's become exceedingly wealthy by basically smuggling salt. It's a rationed substance on the planet, and he sells it at a profit to people who want it, which is interesting because it's the first time, one of the few times that a human element has been mentioned in Star Wars, because it was literally just like a chunk of salt. It wasn't anything special. It wasn't one of those ambiguous names like spice. It was literally just a salt rock, which he gives a chunk to the Mandalorian as basically a bribe to let Rotta be killed so they can make money on it. Now, while this scene played out, I was thinking, this is too easy. The Mandalorian can't believe this guy. This has to be a trap. And it turns out it was, because he goes back and fills in Rotta with what's going to happen. Rotta calls the guards, and the Mandalorian is gassed. When he comes to, he wakes up in the bowels of the stadium, where he's forced to fight Rotta the Hutt in a gladiatorial match, which is pretty cool. The fight is shot from a lot of wide angles and close-ups and stuff like that. You don't get a good view of the floor, which I'll come to in a minute. So the Mandalorian and Rotta go at it. Mando gets the upper hand on him. There's a cool scene where he gets belly flopped by Rotta. You think he's going to get squished, but his armor saves him, because that's how he kills one of the fighters earlier in the film. He squashes him. But during the fight, the Mandalorian explains that we have to work together if we want to get out of this, and that the plan was to kill him and make this fight his last. So the Mandalorian does what the Mandalorian always does, because he's a crafty little bugger. He announces to the crowd that he yields to Rotta, and therefore Rotta is the winner of the fight, and he's now free. But unfortunately, Jano goes back on that. He said, yeah, he's free to die in the ring, and then releases all these monsters into the ring at one time to fight the Mando and Rotta. So these two are now forced to work together. And when the monsters come out into the arena, you realize that you've seen them before. And all the monsters that come out to fight Rotta and the Mando are the chess pieces from the Millennium Falcon, which I thought was really cool. So rather than them being just fictional like chess piece characters, they're actually real monsters. They're all really dangerous. One's got the club, one's that big lizard thing. And I think you see that one in the trailer, trashing a car. One of them's a little electric alien thing. One's a alien centipede thing with a big spike that comes out of its mouth. And this is a very cool fight too, because this movie has a ton of action in it. I'd actually say it's got more action than it has subplots or story arcs. But this scene's very cool. So the fight starts, it goes on for a while, and it's not until probably like halfway through the fight you realise that the floor of the arena looks like a chessboard. It's basically got the same chessboard configuration on the floor as it did in the table on the Millennium Falcon, which I thought was really cool, because there's a shot from above and you realise, oh yeah, they're actually fighting on the chessboard. And one of the creatures picks another one up and kills it in the same way that C-3PO kills Chewbacca's chess piece in A New Hope, which, if you are a diehard Star Wars fan, is very cool and nostalgic. So Rotta and Mando best their foes. The electric bug gets chucked into the laser field thing, shorts it, and the creatures start climbing up into the crowd and make their way out of the exits. So once the action goes out into the streets, chaos follows. The creatures are let loose onto the city. They start destroying property and killing people, and Rotta takes this opportunity to steal a car and fuck off. He's repeatedly told the Mandalorian he doesn't want to go back to the twins and that they plan to kill him. He is the next in line to the Hutt throne, the very large Hutt throne, and the twins want him out of the picture so they can take over. And being Jabba's only son, he's the rightful heir to the Hutt throne, but at the same time he's got a lot of enemies, especially from his own family. The Mando and Grogu catch up with Rotta not too long after, where they recapture him, stick him on the Razor Crest, and Zeb flies them out of there. He explains to Mando that he will be killed if he's returned to the twins. Mando's response is that they need to hand him over in order to get the information about this Admiral coin. And it's during this conversation that Rotta tells Mando he knows the identity of the man he seeks, and that was none other than Jano Coin, the Salt Baron from Shikari. And that shouldn't be too surprising, because the whole time you kind of know Jano's not really who he says he is, and there's something more to him. So all along, the man Mando has been seeking has been right in front of him. And they did a good job of trying to cover that up. It wasn't blatantly obvious that Jano was the man that the Mando was after, but at the same time it's not the biggest surprise either, because he kind of fits the mold. He does have that ex-Imperial air about him, and he's not referred to as Coin the first time you meet him either, I don't think. I think he's called Jano. He's just referred to as Jano, I'm pretty sure. From there, the Mando decides not to turn Rotta over to the twins. He believes his story that he'll be killed if he's returned to them, and decides to nab Admiral Coin by himself. The motley crew head to a beach planet of some type. It's like a coastal beach-looking planet. There's a big mansion there that is patrolled by stormtroopers, which is the first giveaway that it's got something to do with the Empire. And Coin is an Imperial, so it stands to reason that this is the place that Rotta was talking about. The plan is to breach the mansion, grab Coin, stick him on the Razor Crest, and return him to Colonel Ward. The only problem is there's a fair few stormtroopers guarding this mansion. So Admiral Coin's given the riot act to stormtroopers, saying we need to beef up security, yada yada yada. We need patrols out. And I'm not sure if it's the same, if it is Shikari, if it's just a different place, part of it. But it was a bit up in the air where this planet was, or if he did go escape off-world, and this is his mansion retreat somewhere. So he's given the riot act right before Mando breaks into the room and shoots a bunch of stormtroopers. And it's the first time we see stormtroopers in the film, which is really cool, because it's been some time since we've seen proper stormtroopers on the big screen. Last time was Rogue One back in 2016, so yeah, 10 years ago. And I don't refer to First Order stormtroopers as proper stormtroopers, because they're a joke. I did have some questions about this scene. How did they get so close without being spotted? Because Zeb and Mando make their way into the mansion to try to grab Coin. Rotta and Grogu are asleep on the Razor Crest. They grab Coin, stick him in a land speeder, and head back to the ship. But they're followed closely by stormtroopers, who are also in speeders, which is a really cool scene too. It was like a car chase and shootout, but Star Wars-y. There's been scenes similar to that on TV shows, but this is the first time we've seen like a big screen speeder chase with stormtroopers, which is a really cool sequence. There's a funny scene where Mando radios Grogu to tell him to start the ship, which he has no idea how to do, and he's accidentally firing missiles in their direction. There's a cool scene where they hit one of the speeders and it flips up and the stormtroopers go flying in the sand. They make their way back to the ship with coin. They take off and the speeder goes straight into the back of the Razor Crest up the ramp, which is a very funny scene. It stops by Rotta. He's banging the stormtroopers' heads together and throwing them out the back before he pushes the speeder out. Now the Mandalorian has his target, Admiral Coin. He finds himself in a even bigger predicament. He has gone against the Hutts. He's more or less broken the deal between the twins and him. Rotta gave him the information. He bypasses the deal with Rotta and goes nabs Coin himself. He takes Coin to Admiral Ward, where he's taken away for questioning. Ward tells Mando that was messy. You know what the Hutt's response is going to be. And this is about the halfway point of the film. And just going back to the stormtroopers, I did want more stormtroopers and snowtroopers. I think they could have had many more scenes with them. But at the same time, they didn't overuse them either. They didn't just put stormtroopers in just for stormtroopers' sake, just to say, hey, this is a Star Wars film, we've got heaps of stormtroopers. Because the Mandalorian TV show doesn't do that either. They're used at key points, which makes it all the more exciting when you do see them on screen. The first half of the film is very much focused on grabbing former Imperial officers. So there is more of a focus on the Empire, even though it's used sporadically. The second half of the film is more payback from the Hutts, which I wasn't expecting either. I didn't think that the Hutts were going to play such a big part of the film. I didn't think Rotta was going to be basically a main character, which was a nice surprise. But the second half of the film is definitely more of a kind of a gangster revenge film with elements of a Western, where the first part was more Western themed. The stranger coming to town, asking questions about his target, going into a heavily defended area and shooting up a bunch of bad guys, that type of thing. So from there, Mando, Rotta, and Grogu head back to Navarro, the planet from the first couple of seasons. Mando goes back to his house out in the sticks. You see the two bipedal lizard things from the first season there. They're living on his ranch pretty much. And this is where the film goes directly back to Western territory. It's like the old gunslinger retiring out to the wilderness in a cabin, but you know danger's not too far away. There's a very funny scene with the Navarro mechanics. The little alien things are pretty funny. They got this little speeder to come and make some adjustments to the ship with Grogu's help. Now enters another familiar character from the Clone Wars, and that is Embo the Bounty Hunter. He looks like a samurai with one of those big straw hats, but it's like a laser-proof piece of metal. He's a very mysterious alien creature. So the Bounty Hunter has become the Bounty. There's a cool scene in the rain where he sneaks up to Mandalorian's hut. Grogu and the mechanics get told to hide under the floorboards, where they make their way outside to safety. Mandalorian is incapacitated and captured by Embo and put on his ship and taken back to the Hutts. So the Mando finds himself now the bounty for going against them. Before this scene, Mando and Rotta had parted ways. He'd got a ride with this cargo loader droid thing who was going to take him far away from the Hutts where he could just live his life. Now, I did want a bit more of Navarro because it's been a while since we've seen Navarro. I'd nearly forgotten about it because I don't think it's in Season 3 all that much. It played a big part of the first season. This would have been the perfect opportunity to have a Carl Weathers cameo too, but obviously he's no longer with us. But it was cool seeing one of the TV locations up on the big screen. So Embo makes his way back to Nal Hutta with the Mandalorian and one of the mechanics who got snatched by his feral-looking dog thing. So the mechanics go after their own, accompanied by Grogu in a comically small ship, which was very funny. Mando's taken to the Hutts, where his helmet is taken off, and we get our only scene of Pedro Pascal as the Mandalorian. It's been a while since he's taken his helmet off. He took his helmet off a few times in the first season and the second season. Third season, I don't think he takes his helmet off at all. And this is the only scene in the movie where you see him without the helmet. Which, now I think about it, was actually kind of weird, because the whole movie, you know, it's Pedro Pascal from the voice, but there's two different people playing the Mandalorian during the stunt and action scenes. And now this is the first time we've seen him where he's actually playing the Mandalorian. So I don't think he would have worked too long on this film. It is weird when you think about it, because like I said, there's two different people playing him the entire movie. I don't think Pedro Pascal does much of the action scenes, because I'm pretty sure in the first season he didn't do any of them. He was just the voice and the scenes where he takes the helmet off, which is funny because he gets the credit and he's known for this character. It's his iconic character in a iconic franchise, but he technically doesn't really play him. Only in rare occasions where he takes his helmet off. And the Hutts remind the Mandalorian that it's dishonorable for a Mandalorian to lose his helmet, to which he replies, "Not if you're all dead." Now we get a bit more nostalgia. Mando tries to attack the twins. They hit the trapdoor and he falls into a dark, watery pit, which is obviously a nod to Return of the Jedi, and we all kind of knew what was going to happen. He was going to have to fight some disgusting-looking monster in the swamp water. And that's exactly what happens. He has to fight the albino-looking dragon snake thing. He gets attacked by it. He gets a wound to the chest. But never fear, Grogu is here. There's a very funny Rambo-esque gearing up scene when he straps on this medallion he uses as body armor. He's got this little leather gauntlet thing he puts on. He wraps like a belt thing around him. He's putting grenades in his bag. It was very cute, very Rambo. Him and the mechanics make their way through the sewer in order to rescue him. The other thing that I wasn't so much surprised about, but I was really impressed how much screen time Grogu actually got. He was more or less the secondary star of the film, and just how much of Grogu was actually a physical puppet. I don't think there's any scenes in it where he is visual effects. I think he's basically a puppet the entire film. Yeah, he was a puppet. There was no visual effects scenes of Grogu that I can think of. And just how impressive it was and how challenging it would have been to have a puppet to do all these very complex maneuvers throughout the entire film and have him interact with all these different environments. So Grogu saves Mando. They make their escape out into the swamp. The mercs and these creature things get sent out to go find them. Mando takes a bunch of them out in the swamp, but he has been poisoned by the dragon snake and is slowly succumbing to the poison. He falls unconscious. Grogu makes a shelter around him, which looks a lot like Yoda's house on Dagobah. It's basically a mud hut he uses to conceal Din Djarin while he's unconscious with poison. And this is where the film takes a bit of a tender, emotional turn. Because for about the next 15 or so minutes of the film, the Mandalorian is incapacitated and Grogu basically takes over. He builds a shelter, he tries to save Mando, but he doesn't quite know how. He explores the swamp. There's a cool scene of him meditating, which is very Yoda-esque. And the whole setting too, being in the swamp, was very reminiscent of Dagobah. It was an obvious nod to Yoda, but it might have also been a bit of a preview to where Grogu might end up, retiring in a swamp somewhere. So the Mando's out of action for a couple of days. There's a montage of time, which is the first time we've seen this in a Star Wars film, because time's not really something that Star Wars goes into. There's an overhead shot of the stars changing and the days changing. Mando's out of action for a week or so. And this is where Grogu encounters the swamp guy, I call him. There's this alien that lives out in the swamp, like if he's living in the bayou somewhere. He's got a shack in basically the swamp. He's roasting some fish. Grogu steals some fish before he is sprung by the swamp creature. He explains to him if he's been poisoned by the dragon snake, it might be too late for him, but if you give him this medicine, you might be able to save him. The swamp guy mashes up some flowers and herbs and stuff and gives him the antidote. It's in this little package, and you see his little hand pulling the string and getting some of it out, which was really cool because that's all a puppet doing that. It's not special effects, which probably wouldn't have been easy. It would probably have been much easier to animate with visual effects. But there was another really cool element, having this little hand open and pull the string and then get the antidote out and feed it to the Mandalorian. And this is a very heartfelt scene too. It actually got surprisingly emotional. I was not expecting this like emotionally heavy scene towards the end of the film. There's some very sweet scenes of the Mandalorian basically unconscious with Grogu sleeping on top of him. So after a few days, Grogu's out in the swamp and then he comes back to the Hutt to find Mandalorian wide awake and recovered from his wounds and poisoning. Mando's back to normal. He also says the old protect the young, and then the young must protect the old, which is a great line too. It's wise words that apply to the modern day. And it's also where the Mandalorian delivers his famous tagline of, "This is the way. The old protect the young, and the young protect the old. This is the way." It's the first time in the film that he says it, and it's the only time he says it. If I had written this, I would have had him say, "This is the way," every second sentence. And I do like how those now iconic elements of the Mandalorian were only used once, and other elements like the stormtroopers were sporadically used and they weren't overused. And I guess in that sense, the Mandalorian was trying to build its own identity. Yes, we all know it's connected to Star Wars, but the characters of Grogu and Din Djarin are interesting enough they can stand on their own. They don't need stormtroopers popping into every single scene. The story is interesting enough that it can exist under its own identity. It can be connected to Star Wars, but not have to rely on the iconic elements of Star Wars in order to do so. It definitely has its own identity, this film. It does its own thing, and it's got its Star Wars characters in it that are driving this plot, and it's not always relying on older elements, which I did appreciate. So now the Mandalorian is up and about and has recovered from the poisoning. He has a choice to make. The Mandalorian explains to Grogu that we have two choices. We can run and try to hide and get off the planet, but we'll be constantly looking over our shoulders because the Hutts like to hold a grudge. And unfortunately, the Mandalorian doesn't really learn from Han's mistake. You never cross a Hutt because it is a death sentence. The other choice is taking them on and trying to get rid of the problem once and for all. So the pair choose the latter, otherwise the climax of this film would have been quite boring. So Grogu and the Mandalorian gear up for the final battle. They go to the crash shuttle and gear up on weapons and head for the Hutt's palace. There's an epic fight between the droids and the Mandalorian. Rotta's being held in the palace. He's on some type of electro torture device thing. Mando cuts his way through the droids and heads for the palace. So Mandalorian's going to take out the twins before he's confronted by Ember. These two get into a big duel. Grogu releases Rotta. He gets into a fight with the twins, which is pretty cool. It's the first time we've seen Hutt on Hutt fighting action, which was very entertaining. These three big slugs fighting each other, the body slamming each other and crashing on the ground, and the pit starts to break. The ground breaks, the Hutts and Ember fall into the watery abyss. That is until Grogu uses the Force to save Rotta, which is really cool too. It's the largest object he's used the Force against. And there's been little hints to that throughout the film. He's been using the Force to manipulate smaller objects, and this is obviously the biggest one that he's tried to move. But the Mando isn't alone in this fight. Help is on the way. Colonel Ward has sent the X-Wings and Y-Wings to Nal Hutta to take out the Hutts. So there's a big bombing and rescue mission that's going to take place. They're going to bomb the palace. So Mando and co only have a few minutes to make their way to safety. It's really cool seeing Sigourney Weaver in the captain's chair wearing the Rebel pilot uniform. I definitely got a kick out of that. So the Hutts have been defeated, Rotta is saved, and the pair are making their way through the tunnels right before the palace is about to be blown up by a Y-Wing. They jump to safety where they're rescued by Zeb, and they all return to the base. Mando says he's going to take some time off with Grogu, and that just leaves Rotta by himself. They ask him where he wants to go. Is there somewhere safe they can take him? And he said, no, I might hang around here for a while. Mandalorian says, I'm not sure how people would take that. Where Zeb replies that he has a uniform that will fit. and he has a couple of ideas of how Rotta could fit into the Rebel Alliance, which is very interesting seeing a Hutt working for the Rebels and the good guys. It makes a nice change. And I will say I did really like the character of Rotta. He's not the typical Hutt, and obviously I think that was the point. Because you see him in the trailers, you think, oh, are they just going to have Rotta the Hutt in it where he fights the Mandalorian and then you don't really see him again for the rest of the film? But he was really the third main character of the film. He has more screen time than Colonel Ward and Zeb, which makes The Mandalorian an interesting film because you have a guy that doesn't really take his helmet off, who's played by 3 different people, a puppet, and 2 CGI characters were the main stars of this film. Interesting. So the film concludes with Mando and Grogu getting back in the Razor Crest, heading off into space. Mando says to Grogu, push that button, because he's always pushing buttons, and he tells him earlier in the film never to push buttons. Grogu hits the button, and the Razor Crest goes into hyperspace. Our 2 heroes are setting off on their next adventure. And that brings the film to an end. There's a lot about this film I did like, and there were other parts of it that I didn't like or I thought that could be different. Probably the biggest flaw of the entire film is that it needed a subplot to build on. There is no subplot backbone to the film, because it starts off as one film, this Western kind of gangster film in space. The Mandalorian's taking bounties from the Rebel Alliance to capture or kill former Imperial officers. Then it turns into this rescue mission, and about halfway through it goes from rescue mission, Imperial missions being concluded, to him being turned into the bounty and taken back to the Hutts, and this whole gangster revenge film starts. Then once that threat has been dealt with, Mando and Grogu are free to go on their adventures again. But I think this film really needed a subplot to build on. It needed another story in the background that it could have built up, which could have led to sequels for the film, or a direction season 4 could have gone in to continue that story arc. Because there was plenty of opportunities to do it. There's so many mentions of remnant Imperials and these Imperial officers basically being crime lords. They could have easily put an Easter egg that could have led to season 4 or to future films. What if Admiral Coin was just the tip of the iceberg and there was a whole bunch of other hidden Imperials? Because you do see that scene with the Shadow Council from, was it season 2 or season 3 of The Mandalorian, where there's all these high-ranking Imperials that are basically trying to restart the Empire. So they could have gone in that direction. They could have had that in the background and had this bigger connection to the Empire and to Star Wars in general. But they do focus on just this action-adventure, kind of like an extension of the show, which I guess that's obviously what it was. But for a film, I think it could have been bigger. Because as I mentioned, they needed a subplot, and that's the problem, is we never actually find out how big the Empire threat is. We know there's Imperial remnants around the place, but the threat isn't really explained or built upon. Like, the opening scenes were great from an action standpoint, but we know the Imperial officer was trying to restart the Empire, but for what purposes? Does he have orders from a higher authority than him, or is he just doing it so he can be the next emperor? There wasn't really much of a threat. Like, why are they out in the snow with the AT-ATs? They're just constantly patrolling around. Was the snow base some launching pad for a new empire or something like that? There was a lot of different directions that probably could have gone in. So we never find out how big or extensive this threat actually is, because the Empire is really only mentioned. There is no real big threat from it. It kind of just serves as a plot point, where I think it really needed to be the overall subplot that could have built to something much bigger. The other thing I really do have an issue with in the film is the visual effects. They were completely average. For a franchise like Star Wars, it's always pushed the envelope with practical and visual effects. They've always had the best special effects. Star Wars was the gold standard of effects. The visual effects in The Mandalorian fucking suck in some scenes. Rotta looks good, but he could have looked a hell of a lot better. The twins look, very average. The special effects look very underdone. It looks like there's not enough rendering or, compositing or something done to them. They just look a little bit raw and, what's the word I'm looking for? Rough around the edges. They're on par with some of the Jurassic World films and their very underdone special effects. And given that a lot of the creatures and characters in this film have already existed for quite some time, you didn't really have to spend heaps of money in designing them, just more or less animating some of those components. And the film doesn't have the biggest budget, which we'll get into a bit later, but at the same time I think they probably could have stepped up the special effects because they do play such a central role in the film. And when you compare that with Avatar, Fire and Ash, it looks amateurish in comparison. The Mandalorian looks like a film from like 20 years ago. And even films from 20 years ago do have better visual effects than some of the other films today. One aspect I did like was the music. Ludwig Göransson's score. He did the music for the show. Hearing the Mandalorian score on the big screen was really cool. Who doesn't love the Mandalorian theme? There were some parts of the soundtrack that I thought did sound a bit nightclubby. They were a bit too house music-y for my liking. I don't really think that necessarily fit the gangsterish 1920s vibe of Shikari, whatever the planet's called. The other disappointing aspect was the lack of character development. Grogu and the Mandalorian don't really develop over the course of this film as they have over the course of season 1 and 2. There's not a lot of character development. The only character that has a huge amount of development is Rotta. He goes from this fighter to being basically a rebel. Some of the other human characters like Colonel Ward aren't in the film long enough. Sigourney Weaver only has a handful of scenes and not a lot of dialogue. Same with Coin and a couple of the other minor characters. I also noticed there were obvious transitions in this film. And what I mean by that was when they finish a mission or they wrap up one section of the film, that felt like the end of one of the episodes. And when it started with like a new part of the story, like when they go to Navarro, it kind of felt like the start of another episode. And that's obviously down to everyone's used to seeing The Mandalorian on the small screen and seeing it in an episodic format with 30 so minute episodes, which you probably could have fit probably four, maybe five of them in this film. But it was definitely noticeable. The film definitely had these transition points where something would stop and something would start. One thing I did really love, and this is probably the biggest highlight of the film, the puppets were excellent. I mean, I love the mix of visual and practical effects. That was one of the real highlights of the film, and you could tell a lot of time and effort had gone into the puppets because there are so many puppets. The birds are all puppets. In Coin's mansion, there's this bird that gets blown away that's a puppet. It's not visual effects. All the scenes with Grogu are puppets. It really does show you how far practical effects have come in movies. And I think we've just been given a taste of where it's going in the future. Because it was amazing. Like, the scenes with the mechanics and Grogu were really incredible. They move so lifelike. The hands move. They felt real. And it was really nostalgic too, because it reminded me of being a kid and watching movies with lots of puppets in it. Obviously, the original Star Wars trilogy, but movies like Willow and all those sci-fi films that had real puppets and puppeteers in it, as opposed to just visual effects characters. And there's plenty of them in this film, don't get me wrong, but I just love the focus on puppets. It was very nostalgic, especially the parts in the swamp, where there's a little chunk of the film that's just the mechanics and Grogu. There was a lot of scenes where it's just these characters, and it's just puppets interacting. You can obviously tell the puppets by the way they move, but it was really cool to see. It was very nostalgic, very 80s and 70s inspired, and it really just took me back to like how old school movies used to be made. And I really hope that keeps up in the future and more films put the time and effort into building practical effects rather than just relying on special effects that I don't think are getting better. I really think they've kind of hit this weird point. They've kind of plateaued. They're getting lazy. They're not putting the time and effort into to try to get really good effects and make them artistic. They're just trying to pump out film after film. Avatar's the exception because obviously Cameron views that as an art form in itself, and he gives the artist time to make something that is going to stand the test of time. And Avatar is a perfect example of how you can do big budget films with visual effects characters and just make them lifelike and believable. Another thing I really appreciated was the prequel nostalgia, or 90s Star Wars nostalgia. There were so many nods to the prequel trilogy, and I love how Favreau and Filoni don't discredit them the way Kathleen Kennedy and Disney have. They honor the prequels and they incorporate elements of the prequels in the film, like the Staps in the Hutt's palace. They haven't been seen since The Phantom Menace, and it was really cool seeing the Mandalorian riding around on a Stap. And I remember when the Phantom Menace toys come out, one of the first toys that was released, and I think the first toy I got was a battle droid on a Stap. It came in a box. There was the Episode 1 sneak preview figure. There was that and Mace Windu. I got the Mace Windu figure. I got the Stap. And I got something else, but I can't remember what. I still got these figures. I like how they had a droid from pretty much every film represented in it. Love the action and adventure aspect. There's not a lot of dead space in this film. You just dropped into this action roller coaster right from the opening scenes. And the combination of a mob movie meets a Western film in space was also very cool. The length was also good. It wasn't too short. It wasn't too long. It's, I think, 134 or 32 minutes, which is perfect length for a Star Wars film. I was worried it was going to be like 105 minutes or 90 minutes, or it was going to be the other extreme and be 2 hours and 50 minutes. I'm not looking forward to the running time of the Odyssey, I can tell you that. 2 hours and 52 minutes. And what I've seen of that film so far, I was looking forward to it. Nolan's one of my favourite directors, but that looks like an absolute fucking woke monstrosity. I think they're going to completely butcher it, and I do have a big episode planned on that. So overall, the film was pretty good. I did want a bit more. In many ways, it just felt like a longer version of the TV show, which I don't think is much of a surprise. And I think if they had have spent more time with the special effects, that might have separated that a little bit, because the effects look very similar to the visual effects on the TV show. I was hoping for a bigger world and story, in the sense of expanding the show to places it can't go on a small screen. This is a perfect opportunity to just really go epic with The Mandalorian. I feel like they stayed in the lane too much. They worked inside the box rather than working outside of it. And that's probably the biggest criticism I have of the film, is it just misses this golden opportunity to be epic and to kind of break the mold of the TV show. But I think it's limited by the fact that it is a TV show. Maybe there was something behind the scenes that we don't know about. Maybe they had to make it like that, or they were getting pressure from Kathleen and Disney to make it to a certain budget and not go overboard, because Disney's had a lot of underperforming films lately. I know The Rise of Skywalker wasn't the highest grossing Star Wars film of all time, and Star Wars has waned a bit since 2019's Rise of Skywalker. There hasn't been any theatrical released Star Wars films. There's been more TV shows. In that time, Star Wars is still popular, of course, it always will be, but the popularity isn't there like it used to be pre-2019. I think the nostalgia of the sequel trilogy has well and truly worn off too, and people see those three films for what they were, and that is complete shit. Regurgitated, nostalgia-driven, virtue-signaling, woke shit. And the other issue is, I just think it hits the same marks that the TV show does. It doesn't really expand or set up a bigger overarching subplot or story, or lead to a future story, and it had the perfect chance to do so. It's definitely a story that really exists within this film, which is unlike a lot of Star Wars films. I mean, Rogue One was a standalone film, but it does connect to bigger themes, and it obviously fits in between episodes 3 and episodes 4. So it already has that larger connection. It does fit into that bigger story, where The Mandalorian Grogu is really just an adventure of the week type story. And I did want it to be a bit more thematic and a bit more expanding of the Star Wars mythology, and a story that connected to either something to come or could slot in somewhere in between. And unfortunately, it does feel like the odd film out in comparison with the other Star Wars stories. I think this also could have really been bigger if they had have taken some of the themes, such as the finale of Season 2, and built upon them. Because in comparison with Season 2, because Season 2 is the best season of The Mandalorian, hands down, the finale of Season 2 seemed more cinematic and epic and opened the door to a new chapter of The Mandalorian and expanded on the Star Wars mythology by connecting to the original trilogy and connecting back to Luke Skywalker and Ahsoka. So there's a connection to the original trilogy and the Clone Wars. You find out Grogu's name and that he's obviously a Force user, and Luke comes to save the day and takes him to get trained, and then they kind of fuck that up in Season 3 where he just randomly comes back to the Mandalorian and just goes on more adventures. Then there's the Mandalorian story that's been scattered into Season 3 as well. Season 2, in my opinion, I think is more cinematic and epic in its scope and its storytelling than a lot of the Mandalorian and Grogu was. And if they had have done that, but on the big screen, that would have been fucking awesome. If they had have brought Luke into it and Ahsoka, expand that whole story arc, which I haven't seen Ahsoka yet, but I'm not too sure where that goes. I mean, what was the point of bringing Luke back if they were just going to drop that story arc? It seemed like that was a perfect opportunity to have more Luke Skywalker training another generation of Jedi, in this case Grogu. Because the best parts of Season 3 is when you see Luke building the temple and Luke and Ahsoka goes to visit Luke and Grogu and he's training him in the woods. That was some of the best stuff in Season 3, and there was a perfect opportunity to do more of that in here. But having said that, I understand why they got away from the Skywalker saga, because the default argument from Kathleen Kennedy is you have to always connect it back to the Skywalker saga. And it's hard to have a Star Wars movie without a connection to the Skywalkers, where I think it's been proven you can. Mandalorian just proves that you can have a non-Skywalker focused Star Wars story and it's still be good and compelling. Rogue One obviously has Vader in it, so you can't really say it doesn't have the Skywalker connection. So overall, I'd give this film 3.8 out of 5. It was satisfying, but it played it a bit safe in terms of the story. It's almost like there wasn't enough confidence that it would do well enough to get more sequels or another season of the show, so they didn't bother putting in story arcs that might not go anywhere. And that is really unfortunate. I'm not sure if that's so much of a fault of the directors and writers. They might have been planning something bigger. I get a sense that there might have been some studio oversight. Given Disney, that's probably pretty accurate, that they couldn't do certain things and they had to play it very safe because they had a limited budget and they needed to make as much profit back. And knowing how Disney does things, this is exactly the Disney business model, is they don't go out of the box very often. They always stick to what has worked, and they pump out the same shit over and over and over again, the same product or a similar product. You can't go out of the box. They invest a certain amount of money in it, and they need a certain return for it to be deemed successful. And that shouldn't come as much of a surprise because they have literally remade pretty much all of their animated movies now. They're not willing to invest in new ideas, just regurgitate old ones. So let's move on from the film now, and let's look at the box office, Season 4, and the future of the little green cash machine. So why haven't we seen a Season 4 of The Mandalorian? Season 3 came out in 2023. It's been a while. I thought we'd get a Season 4 rather than a film. According to Google, there is no Season 4 of The Mandalorian because Lucasfilm officially shifted the franchise direction, pivoting from a serialized Disney Plus television format into a big screen feature film. In other words, they got dumb and they got greedy. I would have thought Disney would want as many TV shows and films on Disney Plus as possible. They don't have a hell of a lot compared with Netflix, Amazon, and some of the other bigger streaming services. I think Netflix has more releases per week than Disney has in a month. Netflix is the king of streaming. Not saying all the stuff is good, but they have more movies and shows coming out than Disney does. So I would have thought Disney would have invested heavily in episodic serialized TV shows, ones that they can pump out yearly. I mean, wouldn't you want a new season every year to keep people coming back? Especially given the success of the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian. Fair enough, third season wasn't that great, but Third seasons are always a tricky one for any show. Season 2 is always probably the best. I would have thought they would have wanted season after season after season, given the Disney business model. But I guess they got dumb and greedy because they think we can make more money by charging people to watch it in the cinema. Movies are more expensive and take longer to make. I would have thought it would have been cheaper making the TV show. And the Star Wars TV shows take a very long time to make and produce. Even though a lot of the groundwork has been done before, like the Ahsoka TV show I think comes out next year, season 2. And that came out fucking years ago. Same with Andor, that took, a year and a half to make season 2. And I don't know if there's going to be a season 3. It does surprise me that they are now favouring big screen features over TV. The creative and strategic evolution from a 4th season to a movie stems from several key factors. The transition to film. The previously planned season 4 was scrapped in favour of the theatrical movie, The Mandalorian Grogu, which continued the story. Yeah, as I said before, I don't really think it does a good job of continuing that story because it's completely different from where season 3 ends. And as I said, now I think they've played it so safe in the box, and I think they're too scared to add anything new to it because then there's no guarantee they're going to get a sequel. And I thought they were going to make the movie, then make another season. That's what I would have done if I was the showrunner. I would have had the movie, then go straight into another season on Disney+. I mean, The X-Files has done it. There's been many shows that have transitioned into movies and back again, and it's worked. What The X-Files did in between, was it seasons 5 and 6 or 6 and 7? Bring the movie out, then you have another season the following year, and people were hyped for it. I thought that's the direction they were going to go in. Have the movie, have this big budget epic film that was going to lead into the events of season 4, but obviously that's not the case. Rewriting from scratch, creator Jon Favreau had originally written scripts for a 4th season. However, these were set aside because a movie needed to appeal to casual and new audiences. The typical argument Disney always makes, they need to always get new audiences and casual viewers. Sorry, the casual viewer is probably not going to spend the $22 to go see The Mandalorian on the big screen if they haven't seen it on Disney+. If you're not a Star Wars fan, I don't think you're necessarily going to be too inclined to go see a film that's based on Star Wars characters. So I think that argument is a bit stupid, and once again, Disney doesn't seem to understand its own audience. And $22 is the figure for an adult ticket in Australia. It's probably different from wherever you're listening. But it's at a time where the cost of living is going through the roof, everything's expensive, and you're going to ask people to go spend $20 on a franchise they haven't seen, haven't heard about, or maybe they have heard about, but they just don't care. Seems pretty stupid where you have the locked-in, rabid cult fan base of Star Wars fans that are waiting for more Star Wars content on Disney Plus because Disney Plus has fucking monopolized all these great franchises. Who would have justified the ever-increasing price hikes of Disney to pay in order to watch Season 4 of The Mandalorian? Because I remember hearing people talk about Season 1 and 2. Like, when Season 2 came out, it was fucking huge. Like, the finale, everyone was talking about it. I was at some collector's shop somewhere, and these two guys about my age were talking about it. So, did you see The Mandalorian? I had to walk away because I hadn't seen it, and I didn't want it ruined. Then turns out it got ruined on social media about a month later for me. So I don't buy that argument. I mean, if that is what Disney is hedging its bets on, I'm not surprised they lose so much money because, I hate to say it, but the movie-going experience isn't as profitable as it once was. You have to make good movies to get people to come back and want to pay for, and I just don't think what started as a TV show is necessarily going to get a casual audience to pay money to go to the movies to pay for the cinematic experience of the TV show. I just don't think people care enough anymore. I don't think people have the money to just, I'm just going to go to the movies today when they can't afford food and groceries and petrol. I know it's unfortunate it came out at a time when the cost of living is so high and there's a lot of factors going on in the world. I just don't know if that was the best business decision you could make. because a movie needed to appeal to casual and new audiences without requiring them to watch prior seasons or interconnected shows like Ahsoka. The story was reworked completely. Yeah, I think that's retarded because Marvel's entire business model is based off of interconnected TV shows and movies. You don't have to see each film to understand what's going on. That's kind of like saying the audience is too retarded to understand that this is Star Wars or whatever the events happen to be in the film. Because I haven't seen all of the Marvel films and I still get what's going on. I don't particularly care about Avengers Doomsday. I haven't seen Captain Marvel 2, but I saw the other couple of films after that. I haven't seen Fantastic Four. And I still get what's going on. It's not that hard to fucking figure out. And that has been an argument against Marvel as well. People saying you shouldn't have to watch 10 TV shows and 17 movies to understand what the next film is going to be about. And yes, that is annoying because I don't got time to watch those shows. I don't really care about the Marvel shows. But at the same time, the movies explain the events well enough that you understand what's going on. Like Doctor Strange 2, you know that Scarlet Witch went bad. I didn't have to see, what was it, the Marvels? WandaVision, whatever the fuck the TV show's called. I didn't have to watch that to understand that she had gone bad and she wasn't the same character from the last time we saw her. And I think the start of that film does a good enough job of explaining what had happened, with a couple of quick flashbacks and nods to the show. I just think that's a completely bullshit argument. Like I said, it feels like a big adventure film and it doesn't really feel like it's going anywhere apart from the adventure contained within the film. It doesn't feel like it's going to lead to anywhere. And look, maybe they do the Indiana Jones thing and make it, a serialized movie where every film is just another adventure and it's not connected to a bigger part of the story or the lore. Hollywood strikes, 2023, industry strikes severely delayed television production. This disruption promoted Lucasfilm to reevaluate its Star Wars slate and prioritize standalone theatrical films over extended streaming seasons. But once again, Disney needs content. I just don't get why you would completely cut the television content stream off, because people are not going to keep coming back and paying each month if they've watched all the Star Wars shows. I mean, once I'm watching them all, I'm not paying for it. If you're not bringing new shit out, if it's going to take you 6 months, a year, or even a year and a half to bring out the next Star Wars show or the show I'm interested in on a specific streaming service, why don't I just save my money and cancel my subscription after I've watched all the TV shows, because I've got another year to wait till the next one comes? I could save an entire year's worth of budgeted streaming revenue. Why don't I just go spend that on Amazon and get my shopping included with it? There's plenty of streaming services to choose from. And if Disney thinks that that's good enough to justify, was it $30 a month now? $25 a month? To justify that price and have not a lot of content, then I'm sorry, Disney. Why are people going to be paying that much money? Cancel it, come back when they got a new show out. Or just keep making free accounts and just watch it all in a month, because there's not a lot of it there. And the episodes are so short in most of these shows, you can pretty much knock most of them off in a week. And the other interesting thing is Season 4, according to Google AI, is not officially cancelled. No, The Mandalorian Season 4 has not officially been cancelled by Lucasfilm. Instead, the project has been shelved indefinitely. I don't know if that's as good as being cancelled or not, and replaced on the production schedule by the theatrical film The Mandalorian Grogu. And Disney buys a lot of shit they love to shelf, but so it could possibly come out. So if the movie bombs, then are they going to go back and make a Season 4 and Season 5 and stick with TV because it's far more low risk than theatrical releases? The scripts still exist. Series creator Jon Favreau confirmed that he completely finished writing the scripts for Season 4 before the project was shifted. Interesting. He explicitly stated that the paperwork is still waiting on his desk, and it has not been thrown away or permanently deleted by the studio. Future depends on box office performance. Lucasfilm executives, including Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, have indicated that a return to the Disney Plus television format remains a distinct possibility, and let's hope so. The final decision depends entirely on long-term success of the theatrical film universe. But at the same time, what kind of time frame is that? I mean, how long is it going to take the movies to be made? If this one doesn't do well, there probably won't be a Mandalorian 2 for quite some time. There's no Skywalker saga films coming out. There's a couple of standalone titles like the Starfighter and a few films like that. But unless Lucasfilm is going to invest the money necessary and the time necessary to make something like The Old Republic into a new trilogy or a series of trilogies, I don't think you're going to claw back the theatrical experience. The damage has been done with the sequel trilogy. You pissed me fans off, you weren't woke, you disrespected the core fan base as Disney always does, and that fan base I don't think is willing to support what they're selling. Not so much in terms of The Mandalorian. I think Filoni and Favreau are the right people to lead it. That always gets support from the real fans. I do think there is a demographic in the fan base that don't want to support things theatrically because it has the Disney name attached to it. It also just happens to be really poor timing in terms of its release because it came out a few months after fuel prices went through the roof and cost of living is increasing and everything's expensive. So people aren't spending the money on movies. Movies have gotten expensive too. It's not cheap to go to the movies anymore. There hasn't been a lot of stuff out this year. So you can forgive people for not wanting to go spend the money. If you're not into Star Wars and you're not a fan of the Mandalorian show, you probably aren't going to go spend the money to see the Mandalorian on the big screen. I think most of the fans that are seeing the Mandalorian on the big screen are the hardcore Star Wars fans, the ones that have felt hard done by Disney in the past. So there's many factors that are contributing to box office totals and revenue. You know, why can't you have both? Why can't you build the intensity with a season 4, then you have a big epic movie that comes out the following year, then maybe a year after that you have another TV show, another season. What is the plan for the long-term theatrical universe anyway? Are they going to have a Mandalorian film every year? Who knows? If the movie is a massive financial success, Lucasfilm will likely focus on producing big-screen theatrical sequels rather than returning to streaming television. But at the same time, you need content for your streaming service. You don't have a lot. There's a lot of Star Wars shows, but there's not a lot of Star Wars shows at the same time. You do need more seasons of everything. You can't wait years to have a new season out because people will cancel their memberships if there's nothing new out. If theatrical plans change, the studio can easily dust off the completed Season 4 scripts, adjust them to fit the new timeline, and put the show back into production for Disney+. The television version of Season 4 is effectively on hold rather than dead. I think that's a really naive business model. Disney must really think that people have just infinite amounts of money, that cost of living isn't a thing, and that people aren't doing it tough out there. Are you going to be more inclined to pay $24 a month to get lots of movies and TV shows and stay at home because it's cheaper than getting in your car and going out because petrol's fucking expensive at the moment? Well, at the moment it's actually gone down, but it hasn't been in the last couple of months. Or are you going to go take the whole family to see Mandalorian Grogu and spend $98? Some families are spending quite a fucking lot of money going to the movies. 2 adult tickets are $22. Kids are, $16 or something like that. Plus popcorn, drinks. Junk food is expensive here. And it's probably a good thing. A large popcorn and Coke is about $15 to $20. So you are looking at about $100 to take a family of 4 to the movies. Or $25 and you can stay in. So The Mandalorian's been out for 3.5 weeks at time of recording. So how much money has The Mandalorian made? Is it the cash cow Disney wants it to be? Will we see future Mandalorian adventures on the big screen, or are they going to resort to going back to streaming? I found an interesting article on foxnews.com titled Disney Star Wars Relaunch Crumbles as Mandalorian and Grogu Crashes at the Box Office. And it is a bit of an anomaly. We live in this time where not even Star Wars is profitable. Because if this was 10 years ago and this film came out, this would have easily made $800 million by now. Toy sales would have been through the roof, but no one's buying toys, no one's going to the movies. Star Wars made so much money through its merchandise sales, and yet Disney can't give away some of the fucking toys they make. Why? Because you pandered to the fucking woke. You pissed off the hardcore fan base, and now you're paying the fucking price. You pandered to a group of fans that didn't really support your product. They didn't line up at midnight to buy the first batch of toys that came out. You pandered to people who do not give a fuck and just like to whinge. And Grogu is a little green cash machine. He basically prints money. mean, I want a Grogu toy. I want to buy one of those life-size ones. It'd be cool. They're expensive, but I'd probably pay it because it is cool. Grogu's cute. But I've been to the shops recently and I haven't seen any Star Wars merchandise around. I haven't seen a big end aisle display with Mandalorian and Grogu toys and a whole bunch of fucking life-size Grogu toys. You have to go to collector shops and stuff to try to source that stuff, or they don't have it at the physical shop. You got to go to fucking find it on a Kmart marketplace or something like that, which is fucking annoying. So is it a surprise that it's not doing that well because everything's online? It's not as accessible as it used to be. I'm a bit surprised too because I thought this film was going to be more successful than it has been. We're also at this point in time where if Grogu and the Mandalorian cannot get people to come to the cinema, nobody can at this point. A 70% second weekend drop-off and an estimated $10 million third weekend all but cement the end of its theatrical run. Ouch. This article is by Ian Miller, published June the 7th, 2026. So time of recording, that was a couple of days ago. It is almost repetitive at this point. A Star Wars related property has disappointed relative to pre-release expectations. 7 years after The Rise of Skywalker, Disney and Lucasfilm hoped that they could relaunch the all-important franchise with Mandalorian and Grogu. And in doing so, once again revealed they understand very little about the audience they're trying to serve, and I think that is 1,000% true. They do not understand their audience. I don't think they ever did. It doesn't help when you have a somewhat controversial star in Pedro Pascal, who is a little bit of a woke socialist. When The Force Awakens hit theaters under the leadership of then Lucasfilm head Kathleen Kennedy, apparently she is not there anymore, or she's not the head of Lucasfilm from what I heard. I don't know if that's true or not. I hope it is. I haven't really had time to look it up because I've been covering too many depressing world events. It was a tremendous financial success, and at the same time, that was the first Star Wars film that had come out since Revenge of the Sith, so there was a massive hype. There had been a 15-year period in between films. There was no Disney Plus. There was no new Star Wars content. No one thought they were going to get any new Star Wars content, let alone TV shows and movies and spin-offs. That was the first piece of Star Wars content that had been out in ages. It was a big theatrical release film. It was connecting back to the original trilogy. It was episode 7. People were pumped. I was pumped until I saw it. So I understand why that was so big compared to Mandalorian and Grogu all these years later. While hardly reinventing the wheel creatively, and that's true, it at least provided a solid foundation for the universe to build from. Yeah, it did, and then unfortunately it was fucked up and then didn't make any sense, and the sequels try to basically overwrite everything that they had built upon. The Last Jedi was just too polarizing. It just tried to do its own thing. It was the deconstructed Star Wars that nobody asked for. But the ensuing releases in the main trilogy within the Star Wars universe saw progressively diminishing returns as it became clear the studio had no cohesive plan or sense of what audiences love or loved about the series. Yeah, no, they were just playing on nostalgia the whole time. You had a divisive director in Rian Johnson, another director that really didn't have much of a clue. He thought that's what Star Wars fans wanted. Apparently his version of the opening of Force Awakens was different. And you had Kathleen Kennedy micromanaging everything and everything being overseen by Disney. You had to fit it into this box. Everything had to be nostalgic. It wasn't creative. It was basically just A New Hope reworked with a female lead and more progressive characters. It was pretty much, I mean, it wasn't exactly the same, but it was heavily influenced by it. It played off of nostalgia too much for it to be taken seriously. And you bring the original cast back and either kill them off or completely destroy their characters, and you piss all the fans off. There was no bigger story. Then Kathleen Kennedy goes on the record and says, we don't have thousands of comic books and hundreds of books to choose from. I was like, yeah, you do. You had Timothy Zahn and authors like him, writing books for 30 years after Return of the Jedi. Shut the fuck up. His series would have made the perfect sequel trilogy. Old characters with new characters in a familiar environment with the Empire, because the First Order fucking sucks. Kylo Ren is a fucking joke. Snoke has no impact whatsoever, and there's very little to like about the sequel trilogy. Classic heroes like Luke Skywalker or Han Solo were undermined at every opportunity. That was painfully obvious. The level of disrespect shown to legacy characters like that was disturbing and was the point of no return for me. I didn't like The Force Awakens when I first saw it. I got about halfway through the movie and I thought, this is really going nowhere. This is not this grand new chapter in the Star Wars saga. But by the time they had killed Han off and he got killed by his own son and fell into a never-ending pit, which is the same way most of the Sith Lords have died, I thought, this is fucking disrespectful. And then they completely neutered Luke Skywalker and made him a hermit on an island that doesn't give a fuck about his friends. That was not Luke Skywalker. And it's good that Mark Hamill has come out and spoken about his frustrations about playing that version of Luke. But just how that was allowed to get to the stage where it was actually released as a fucking film is beyond me. Why wasn't that flagged and someone said, hey, no, this is not Luke Skywalker's character. You're going to piss off so many people. You can't have him live on an island like a hermit, abandon his friends, start some failed Jedi academy, then try to kill his fucking nephew, and then force meditate himself into oblivion. Completely fucking stupid. And what they did to those characters was unforgivable. Princess Leia doesn't get the same treatment, and I wonder why. And then other characters like Admiral Akbar get killed off and replaced with purple-haired social justice warriors. The Last Jedi incorporated a bizarre class and political storyline. Yes, it did. It was pretty much the whole backbone of that story. Canto Bight was the fucking most retarded planet that has ever been put on screen. That had little relevance to the plot within the individual movie, and it was swiftly discarded as a plot within the trilogy afterward. Interesting. The plan, such as it was to make audiences care about the leads simply because they existed. It didn't work. Yeah, we were meant to care about a new generation of characters because one was black, one was female, and the other one was ambiguously gay, apparently, like anybody cared. Because that's not what Star Wars is about. And I think that paragraph sums up the failing of The Last Jedi perfectly. You have Disney lecturing the audience about class and politics. Sorry, you make billions of dollars, I don't. There are several plots running through that film that are, like the article said, this bizarre class and political storyline. You have that, like I said, you have the Canto Bight subplot, which is like half an hour of the film in that casino planet where all the apparently like rich white people went to gamble and do arms deals and buy and sell vehicles for the Empire. It wasn't very discreet either. It was very obvious who you were targeting. It was basically Star Wars version of MAGA supporters. And the political storyline too, there was this obvious hierarchy. Like everybody in the fucking First Order is pretty much white. They were obviously the fascists and supposed to be the Nazis. It's been a while since I've seen that film. Don't ever really care to see it again, to be honest. Then there was the stupid hierarchical arguments between Poe Dameron and Admiral Holdo. Who's going to lead the Rebel Alliance now that Princess Leia did a Mary Poppins thing in space and now she's unconscious for half the film? It was completely retarded. But anyway, moving along. Otherwise I'm going to be whinging about fucking Last Jedi for the next 2 hours. Fast forward to 2026 and Disney's apparent hope for the Star Wars series was that their streaming service would provide a building block for theatrical releases. The Mandalorian was popular in the first season as a novel, Western-style episodic adventure. That momentum quickly fizzled, but with few other options, they rushed a cobbled-together story into theaters anyway. Yeah, I think that's kind of apparent. Every review I've heard about The Mandalorian and Grogu is, for the most part, pretty much been the same, and they all say similar things like, yeah, it was good, but it wasn't great. It was a good adventure, but not much more than that. And I didn't know the momentum had fizzled that's quite so quickly. I knew it was getting a lot of backlash after Season 3, but rightfully so. Season 3 just was not good. And it was repeating some of those mistakes that The Last Jedi did. Not only has it failed, the latest box office returns show how far Disney and Lucasfilm have to go to regain audiences' trust. Yeah, and I think that is the big thing. They do have to buy back the trust of the hardcore original fan base because you have pissed in its face for over 10 years now and we keep getting shit film after shit film and political messaging thrown at us. There was none of that in the original Star Wars. Politics was always there in Star Wars, but it was done as part of the universe. It wasn't just, you're evil because you're a rich white person. It wasn't that type of fucking stupid woke political messaging. It was more subtle than that. It wasn't a Star Wars story that was fixated and heavily influenced by American and Western politics from 2015 onwards. It didn't have to comment on MAGA or Trump or the Republican Party or anyone else or the warmongers. Star Wars got its point across perfectly and brilliantly by telling a classic good versus evil story. It uses all the hallmarks of classic storytelling. The hero's journey, the hero has to slay the dragon, the hero saves the day, the bad guy finds redemption, yada, yada, yada. All these classic hallmarks that make every other classic story translate over multiple generations. Because nobody in 10 years or 20 years' time is watching the fucking sequel trilogy. They're going to say, look at this woke fucking nightmare. This was a product of the times. Where even the prequel trilogy is going to hold up much better in 20 to 50 years' time. Star Wars is 50 years old next year. And it's just as relevant in 2027 as it was in 1977. It translates to different generations because the storytelling is classic. Disney just did not do any of that. And Disney's been around for a long time. They've been telling a lot of stories and they used to do it well. And they went woke, they went political, and now they're going broke. So that old adage, go woke, go broke, holds up here. The opening weekend of The Mandalorian and Grogu, despite coming around the long Memorial Day holiday, was underwhelming at just 80 million. Then the film saw a catastrophic 70% drop in its second weekend in theatres to 24.4 million. Well, the news didn't get any better this past weekend. If anything, it got worse. Sunday's estimate is that The Mandalorian will bring in around 10 million or just under, all but cementing the end of its domestic theatrical box office run, and leading to catastrophic financial losses for Disney, which is a shame because they really do like Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni. With its production budget and marketing costs factored in, The Mandalorian needed to bring in 400 to 500 million to break even. And as its box office continues to dwindle, it currently sits at just 293 million globally. Yeah, wow. Thanks in large part to the woeful 155 total from US theatres. The picture gets much worse when comparing against previous Star Wars films and adjusting for inflation. Here's a list of recent releases in the franchise and where Mandalorian ranks at the domestic box office. Number 1, Force Awakens, 1.27 billion. Number 2, The Last Jedi, 780 million. Interesting, there is a massive difference between Force Awakens and Last Jedi. Rogue One, 700 million. Interesting. So that made quite a lot. Rise of Skywalker, 620 million. Interesting. Another big drop-off. Solo, 265 million. If that doesn't tell you something was wrong, I don't know what is. I don't know why the marketers and the accounting department at Disney don't flag that to the higher-ups and go, we need to look at why there's been a $400 million difference between films. Number 6, Mandalorian and Grogu, 155 million. Ouch. Solo was viewed as such a flop that it ended plans for a standalone trilogy focused on Han Solo. And in hindsight, that was probably a good thing because that just didn't do anything to add to Han Solo's character. I've never ever once thought about that film being really connected to Star Wars or that was the origin of Han Solo. Han Solo is my favorite character. It was an okay film. I completely ignore it from canon. Once again, I treat it like a what-if adventure. Mandalorian is tracking to come up 70 to 80 millions below it. Adjusted for inflation, there is no other way to put it. That's a failure. Mandalorian might not have been political or specifically divisive, which it wasn't. Though, of course, star Pedro Pascal has worked hard to be divisive on his own. It's the culminative effect of their choices has grown over the years to the point where audiences simply don't care anymore. Yeah, interesting, because I heard somewhere on some show, some article I read, young people are not going to the movie. They're not seeing films with the same people in it. They said they don't want to see films with Chris Hemsworth or Pedro Pascal in them, which is interesting. And they don't want woke messaging. They don't want politically divisive storytelling. They don't want a lack of emotion or corporate messaging in films either. They want just good old-fashioned storytelling. Disney and the Kathleen Kennedy version of Lucasfilm managed to lose the trust of viewers despite having ownership of the most successful and popular film franchise in Hollywood history. And that should be really telling. It doesn't matter how good the story or the product is. If you have shit management, you can derail any train. It's incredible. Like, it should be fucking impossible to lose money making new Star Wars content. But Kathleen Kennedy, Lucasfilm, and Disney managed to find a way to do that. We're living in this weird inverted timeline where not even a mega popular franchise like Star Wars is profitable anymore. It's fucking bizarre. It'd be interesting to see when that Harry Potter show comes out at the end of the year, to see how that stacks up. I think it's the end of the year it comes out. I'm not too sure. Harry Potter fans are pretty diehard as well. I know they've made some race swaps to some characters and they've changed a few things around. It'd be interesting to see if the Harry Potter fan base is as judgmental as the Star Wars fan base, and to see how that goes, because apparently it's been renewed for a season 2 already, but yeah, I don't know. I think some fans like it, some fans are on the fence about it. Books will be written about this. Film school classes will be taught about this, and it was completely avoidable. Had they simply focused on quality, story, plot, and character growth instead of fulfilling every stereotype imaginable, now they stand to lose over $100 million on a Star Wars movie. You have to hand it to them. It's impressive, if nothing else. Brilliantly put. I couldn't agree with that more myself. Thank you for articulating what I was thinking, Mr. Ian Miller. If there isn't books, uni courses, and movies made about this, I'd be surprised. There should be a uni course, how not to run a successful business or film franchise into the ground, because it should basically be impossible to do this. And Jurassic Park has gone the same way. You made fucking too many of them too quick. You made shit. The core tenets are quality, story, character development, and the sequel trilogy had none of that. They're not good stories. I wouldn't take on a project like Star Wars because, one, the fan base is pretty hardcore. They can get very protective over Star Wars, and rightfully so. I'm a fucking Star Wars fan. I got fucking pissed when I saw The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker. It'd be very daunting for anyone to take on, because you're not going to please all the fans, but at the same time, you have to try to make something good. Use those classic storytelling arcs, and they just ignored all of that in favor of divisive fucking social justice messaging and fucking politics. So once again, fuck you, Disney. And just to reinforce that, I found another article on yahoo.com. The Mandalorian and Grogu Future, addressed by Star After Box Office Struggles by Michael Patterson, Tuesday, June the 9th. This article, unsurprisingly, is going to touch upon the future of The Mandalorian and Grogu and where the franchise and where the series might be heading. It's safe to say that Mandalorian and Grogu was one of the most high-profile releases of this year so far. Even so, the Star Wars movie underperformed at the box office. Its isolated performance was fine for a typical movie, but for one attached to one of the biggest film franchises of all time and one of the most popular Disney Plus shows since the streamer's inception, it underperformed. Despite a slightly better than expected opening weekend, the flick saw a huge 70% decline in its second weekend. That's a fucking lot. Leaving Star Wars fans feeling very deflated. Low-budget horror movies, Obsession, and Backrooms are now catching up to its current box office. Wow. That should be telling the executives at Disney something. Your formula is not working. You can't keep denying it any longer. You are not making shit that is resonating with the fans. You have low-budget horror movies are overtaking your fucking $180 million Star Wars big-budget action film. It's not good enough, Disney. If that isn't raising a red flag, nothing will. Obsession and Backrooms are now catching up to its current box office total of $294 million, despite opening lower. Naturally, the futures of Din Djarin and Grogu, as well as that of the Star Wars franchise itself, are unclear. Or, well, at least it seems that way. The Mandalorian and Grogu sequel could happen according to Mando actor. And which actor is this? There could be a way for more Mandalorian and Grogu stories. It seems according to Brendan Wayne, one of the 3 actors credited for playing Din Djarin. There is a future for both of the beloved Star Wars characters, speaking at Fan Expo Philadelphia last weekend. He was certain that the double act would return, even suggesting which format it could be. Quote, "We also know, or maybe only I do, that there is definitely a place in the world for more of us. I think the audience have given us the permission to proceed. I don't know if it's going to be on the small screen or the big screen, my guess, the big screen, but I'm looking forward to it." Wayne's comments do highlight the crossroad that Din Djarin and Grogu are at, because both originated in Disney Plus series, The Mandalorian. They were supposed to return for a 4th season by now. However, Disney and Lucasfilm plans changed during the Hollywood strikes. It's a dilemma for sure. If The Mandalorian had overperformed at the box office, it would have guaranteed their return, but it still wouldn't have answered the questions surrounding the future of the Disney Plus show. With Star Wars going back to movie theaters, it does seem like theatrical releases are once again the future of the franchise, but the film's performance wasn't the triumphant performance that the galaxy so far away was hoping for. That said, Wayne's comments do suggest that there is more story to be told for the pair, and Disney might actually consider telling another story on the big screen despite the film's shortcomings at the box office. Yeah, I mean, call them ambitious, call them stupid, call them not paying attention to what the market and the fans are telling them. Call it crazy, but I mean, I'd see another Mandalorian film on the big screen. I did enjoy it. At the same time, yeah, I don't know. I think if I was in charge of Disney, I'd probably make season 4 rather than put all that money and marketing into another film that is probably going to underperform, because it doesn't seem like the message has been received from Disney. And you know what? There is absolutely a case to be made for it. At the end of the day, $295 million isn't a number to be sneezed at either. There is clearly still demand for these characters, so their story can't be over. Whether it's on Disney Plus or the big screen, it really doesn't matter, because Mando and Grogu still resonate with viewers. Yeah, and rightfully so. I mean, who doesn't like the little green guy? And honestly, there is a method to Lucasfilm and Disney's madness. Here, with this seemingly random theatrical release in the midst of The Mandalorian's run. The Star Wars movie just cost north of what a 4th season of the series would have cost. Interesting. With its final budget coming in somewhere around $144 million. That's actually pretty cheap for a movie of this scale, because you look at the last batch of Disney remake films and even some of their Disney original films, they've all been like $250 million plus. Dial of Destiny was 200 and something million, and they had to spend another $150 million in marketing and reshoots. Snow White was like $200 million. Some of those remakes have cost like far more than like 2 or 3 animated versions did back in the 90s. So $144 million is pretty cheap for a movie of this scale and having the Star Wars name attached to it. And that's pretty modest compared to the typical $200 to $300 million costing Star Wars movie range. Yeah, interesting. Regardless of whether Mando and Grogu finishes its box office run in the green, it doesn't really matter, as it will likely be a profitable outing for these studios anyway. Not only does Grogu make a lot of merchandising money for the franchise, the film is going to be a massive hit whenever it arrives on Disney Plus, considering that the streamer is the home to The Mandalorian. So getting those bumps on top of a solid box office run should help propel The Mandalorian and Grogu into the green in the long run. With the box office continuing to evolve in today's day and age, you can bet that the film will find success to that of the TV show on streaming, making it a long-term success story. Therefore, it makes sense that there might be more plans for The Mandalorian and Grogu on the silver screen. He is hoping that they can come to fruition, because we are very much invested in the way of the Mandalorians and will be for a long time to come. Interesting. So we've heard the debate from both sides, the failing collapsing side, and maybe this isn't a bad thing because it will probably find its feet in the long run. I've also heard different numbers regarding the percentage of the drop-off box office rate. Some say 70, some say 59%. I found a Forbes article titled Mandalorian and Grogu tumbles out of the top 5 after 59% drop-off at the box office by Tim Lammers. published 6th of June, 2026. I'm not going to read the whole thing. So according to the summary, Star Wars The Mandalorian Grogu is struggling at the box office, dropping 61% in its third week and falling out of the domestic top 5. The Jon Favreau directed film had a soft opening, earning $98 million over the Memorial Day, less than 2018 Solo, and suffered a 69% second weekend drop, now projected for a $9.5 million. Its domestic total nears $155.3 million against a $165 million production budget. It faces stiff competition from new releases like Scary Movie and Masters of the Universe. The one thing I have found consistent across these articles is the figures are all slightly different, and it's also hard to know how much a studio actually spends on making a film like this. Some say it's a $165 million production budget, so it'd be $144 million for the film and whatever the other $25 million was for. However, I don't believe that. I think the marketing budget would have been like at least a $50 million, $100 million, because Disney spends a lot on marketing, so I don't quite believe that's the correct amount either. Furthermore, low-budget indie hits like A24's Backrooms and Focus Features' Obsession are outperforming it alongside a strong $22.1 million debut from YouTube's The Amazing Digital Circus. As such, The Mandalorian Grogu earned $98 million domestically over Memorial Day weekend, yada yada yada. Unfortunately for Disney, things are going from bad to worse in the Mando and Grogu movie's third weekend in theaters. As of Saturday's deadline, projected that the film is looking at a $10 million take in its third weekend frame, so those numbers are similar to the first article, and a 59% drop-off in business from its disastrous second weekend drive for a 6th place finish at the weekend's domestic box office. Interesting. So there you go. Is it a success? Is it a failure? I guess the only thing that really matters is if you like it or not. I enjoyed it. I hope there's more of them. I hope there's a season 4. I think there's definitely more room for Mandalorian stories and Star Wars stories. Let's just hope they can be done right. And that's not saying there's anything wrong with Mando and Grogu. It was a good film. But let's hope Disney can get its act together and just make proper Star Wars stories again with proper thought-out story arcs and some character development. Because those two factors are the biggest flaws in The Mandalorian Grogu. Even if it loses money and doesn't make its projected totals back, at the end of the day, it's still a good film, and it sounds like we are going to get more Mandalorian Grogu stories in the future. And as Brandon Wayne outlined, that might be on the big screen or it might be on the small screen. And in a sense, Disney is also lucky because the merchandise sales for The Mandalorian Grogu are probably going to be more than the box office returns, especially toy sales of Grogu. I know I'm planning on buying a couple if I can ever find them. So there is hope for the little green cash machine after all. And that brings us to the end of the episode. A big thank you to everyone who listened to the end. I hope you all enjoyed it and got something out of it. If you'd like to support the Truth Tank, there's a couple of things you can do. Head on over to the Facebook and Instagram page, give them a follow and a like. My posts on Instagram need a few more likes, so come over, join the community, join the conversation. I'd like to hear your thoughts. You can download and listen to the Truth Tank on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Pandora, Amazon Music, Audible, Castbox, Podbean, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. If you really want to support the show, you can head on over to my brand new spring store, pick yourself up some merchandise. You'll be supporting the show and looking really cool doing it. If merch isn't your thing, why don't you make a one-off donation on my Buy Me a Coffee page, or in my case, buy me some tank fuel. You can make a one-off or a recurring payment of your choosing. Just donate whatever you think the show is worth. It helps support the show and the work I'm doing. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell anyone you think might like the show. Help spread the word and get the Truth Tank out there. You can leave a 5-star rating and review on your preferred podcast player. Each review helps the show grow and get found. And I'll be back in the next week or two with a brand new episode. But until then, I'm the Tank. This is the Truth. Truth to tell.